All right, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the character of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the guy who it really comes up and pushes the New Deal through. We've been talking a little bit about the New Deal and how we deal with the Great Depression, and certainly the New Deal is not possible without Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt succeeds Herbert Hoover as president of the United States in 1932, and really in many ways similar to Hoover, and in many ways completely different. One of the ways he's really similar is both were optimistic. Both felt like they could do anything. Both felt like if you put your mind to it, things were possible. And so Franklin Delano Roosevelt, much like Herbert Hoover, felt like, hey, the United States was going to be all right. We were going to get through this. We were going to be okay. And that's summed up really even in his inaugural address, where he declares a war against pessimism. He declares the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And that was such a huge catchphrase that really, I mean, till this day, my guess is that even most of you listening to this presentation are probably familiar with that saying, and it comes from Franklin Delano Roosevelt's inaugural address. So he believed we would be okay. Where he excelled was that he was able to communicate that through what were called fireside chats to the American public. Whereas when Hoover would talk about things being okay, people looked at him, "You're a liar." When Franklin Delano Roosevelt said things would be okay, people looked at him like, "Oh, thank goodness." And that was reassuring to them in the way he presented it. So definitely an optimist. He was also somebody who was incredibly determined and incredibly aggressive. Again, traits that he would really share with Hoover. Hoover also a very determined individual. Um, Franklin Delano Roosevelt's character then probably nowhere better summed up this aggressive idea, this determined idea, than how he dealt with his own personal problems. Many people do not realize that Franklin Delano Roosevelt was handicapped. He could not walk. He had suffered from polio as a young man, and it had paralyzed him from the waist down. He would remain wheelchair bound for really the rest of his life. And he fought very hard to overcome this. And he didn't like to be thought of as somebody who was not capable, who was impaired. In fact, he very rarely let himself be photographed in a wheelchair. There's very few photographs that were ever published of him in his wheelchair. Again, because he didn't want to be thought of as handicapped. And even though he was really wheelchair bound, he did with difficulty manage to stand. He would, and again, this is evidence of how determined he was to overcome problems. He had very heavy metal braces built for his legs, and he could, with great effort, go ahead and stand behind a podium or a lectern and deliver a speech, as he did when we declared war on Japan, as he did for his inaugural, when he was first elected President of the United States. He could also walk for short distances with the aid of somebody else. He would have to, oftentimes when you see him standing, he has his hand on somebody, or he is holding on to the podium or lectern. He never spoke just at a microphone. He was always standing behind something because he basically was having to hold himself up with his upper body strength. But again, he wanted to attack problems. He was aggressive in how he attacked any challenge that faced him, and certainly he was that way with the Great Depression. One way that he was significantly different than Hoover was that FDR was a pragmatist. Hoover tended to be an ideologue. In other words, Hoover believed that what was right, and that was it. FDR tended to believe, hey, it doesn't matter whether we think it's right or wrong. What matters is, does it work? And if it worked, he really didn't care. So he was willing to try anything. Where there are certain things that Hoover just wouldn't do, FDR was willing to do almost anything and see if it worked. And that's evidenced in his New Deal, all the different programs, and there's a ton of them: CWA, PWA, WPA, FERA, NRA, NIRA, CCC, AAA. All these different programs. He was trying everything, every idea that came down the pipe. Almost, he tried it. Politically, also very different in his beliefs than Hoover. Politically, Roosevelt was a Democrat, and he wanted to reform capitalism. He was a progressive. He felt one of government's primary job, if not its primary job, was to help people. And this would be different than a Hoover or than a Coolidge, who felt like, no, the primary job of government was to protect rights, but not necessarily to directly go and aid people in struggling with the Great Depression. That was people's job to help one another. The political career of Roosevelt, he starts off actually in local government, but it quickly moves into statewide politics, becomes the governor of New York in 1928 and 1932. Also elected president in 1932. And by far and away, the thing that he is most known for in his presidency was how he dealt with the New Deal, or how he dealt with the Great Depression with the New Deal, rather. and so it becomes his most widely known, I guess, domestic initiative.